Hello, OFF. Thanks very much for having us. And of course, a massive thanks to Side Effects for the invitation. This is quite the stage, quite the list of speakers that you've got running down today. So yeah, we're very proud to be part of this. My name's Clayton. I'm the ECD at Found.
And my name's Kieran. I'm design lead at Found.
So, just as a bit of a kick-off, a little bit of an introduction about us as a studio. Yeah, we're a varied bunch. We've done quite a lot of different work for lots of different clients and lots of different sectors, and it's the way we like it. You know, we work with varying kind of technologies. As you can see here, this is a kind of snapshot of some of the work that we've done with IBM over the last few years. You know, it sees us doing learning quite a lot when you're dealing with a client like that. Also, there's learning to be had from clients such as Hublot, Ralph Lauren, Dyson. So, you know, there's kind of technology, but there's also sustainability in some of the projects you've got on the right-hand side there as well. So, yeah, as I said, it's a varied bunch, but it takes us also, you know, into the world of automotive as well. So, technology and beauty, luxury, they all kind of add up quite nicely when you go into this kind of world here. So, you've got projects for Bentley, Range Rover, Ford Performance, and also a sneaky little glimpse of Mercedes Formula One over there as well. So, yeah, super proud of the people that we work with and the clients that we work with. But that you know is all completed by a team of 22 people in London, UK, and that team you know come from lots of different backgrounds. You know, lots of different you know people from architecture, from graphic design, from filmmaking, from sound design even. That means that they're kind of working in lots of different packages and have come from, you know, different ways of thinking. But, you know, we're using, as you would expect, lots of 3D motion design packages, but more often than not, we're seeing ourselves working within Houdini. So I guess that's why we're on the stage now.
Yeah, so we've spent the last 2 years using TOPS in Houdini, not just to automate the repetitive tasks within the program, but also as like a means to amplify our design process too. And this contact sheet here sort of represents a shift in how we work on some of our projects and how we're starting to move away from this idea of manually iterating in our work in favor of sort of automated exploration. And for those of you that are kind of new to TOPS, we're going to look at how we're using the wedging feature in a lot of our project pipelines to not only generate geometry, but run simulations, export and compile renders too. And here's a couple of commercial examples that we did not too long ago. This one's Guinness Smooth. I don't know if anyone's tried it, but it's kind of the fizzier, stronger version of Guinness, and it was a really great project to work on. And aside from the sort of beautiful bottle renders that we had to do and immersive bubble sims, we created. We had this droplet collision shot to do that appeared halfway through the film, and in our first meeting, before we even had really sat down with the client, we'd used TOPS to sort of wedge 20 variations of a flip sim we'd built, and we took that contact sheet to the meeting with the client, and actually rather than sort of have a discussion about what they liked, didn't like, they just picked one, and it was kind of a bit of a eureka moment, like, oh, can we actually just do this in like all of our meetings now? And sort of rather than feedback, yeah, they just picked an option that in their mind felt like Guinness Smooth, and we moved straight into WIP. And so why is that important? Well, often this is the typical workflow for an artist. You're going to sim something, you might review it internally, then with the client, you'll make some tweaks, and you'll repeat that process. And sometimes that you might get it right in 2 attempts. Sometimes if you're having a really bad day, it might be 20, and if someone's giving you a hard time. But with TOPS, like the approach we're sort of taking, is we just sim a bunch of versions. We might sim 20 versions, we might sim 50, 100. Quite often we'll share a large contact sheet with the client, or we'll just pick like a smaller set of the best. And we use the same approach for a hair break asset we created for L'Oreal, again, wedging about 30 simulations and presenting a smaller contact sheet to the client for discussion. And yeah, again, they were able to pick 2 options immediately to move forward with into WIP. And L'Oreal actually liked the results so much, it sort of became their like global approach to how hair breaking should be visualized, which kind of considering we actually hadn't sat down and iterated on a lot of the work, felt like a bit of an easy win for us. So yeah, it was good. So with TOPS, yeah, we're sort of able to generate and iterate faster. We avoid those annoying feedback loops with clients. And most importantly, we can spend more time doing the fun stuff. We're spending less time, we found we spend less time tweaking parameters, watching caches cook, and more time, working on lighting, refining our cameras, and sort of testing, other, viable routes out, really.
So just to take another look at that in action, Kieran mentioned a couple of fairly high-profile clients for us there, Guinness and L'Oreal. This is a less high-profile client, but sometimes the less high-profile clients have more freedom creatively. So this saw us being able to apply TOPS in a way that, really amplified the workflow that we wanted to go through. And hopefully this gives you a little bit more of an understanding as to how it can be used. So London Craft Week, very briefly, is a festival out in London, believe it or not. And every year they commission a hero image. And here you're seeing 21, 22, and 23. We have a couple of projects for this particular client to show you, but this one started life in a kind of a world of needing to feel like fashion and fabric. So they were very interested in kind of materiality of the craft of fashion, let's say. So here you're sort of seeing some of the end products, actually. We're kind of going a bit backwards with this particular presentation. But you're seeing the final selection. But the images make it onto the front of the guide. They make it across town on various billboards, bus shelters, and tube posters there as well. So it's it's for a moment in time across the city. It's quite nice to sort of see this come to life. I mentioned the fashion and fabrics, and these are some of the references that the client gave us right at the beginning. And we got quite excited about this because fashion and fabrics could be quite dull, but actually I think the way they were going with this, the technical fabrics they're looking at, that skirt there, top left, for example, is kind of something really interesting going on with the way that behaves with light. So we were sort of, we were really into the kind of initial share, so it was quite promising from the start. We got into, looking into how we might create structures of fabrics, weaves, but aside from that, we were taking a look at how might we be able to use Houdini to bring that fabric to life in animation. Here you're seeing some tests, some initial R&D, and you can see there's a whole sort of host of ways that we were kind of pulling that fabric around, using color, using various elements within Houdini in order to drive things like elasticity, folding, flexing, stretching and ruching, all of these kind of things that we could see fabric doing. So we were having a lot of fun with it, and we putting a number of these things in front of the client as well. As Kieran said before, that's fantastic to be able to have that range of assets and range of tests. But we've got one in particular that we're going to give you a bit more of a deep dive into.
And like Clayton said, we're not always sure where we're going on these R&D sprints, but this example that we're going to share now sort of led to some really interesting results that were almost again entirely facilitated by TOPS. One of the references the client had sent, you saw in the previous pages, was this image from Martine Rose's collection, and we were really drawn to this like marble-like print work on some of the pieces she'd made that season. We thought, this would be a really interesting sort of challenge to try and recreate something similar in Houdini. And around that time, there was this link sort of floating around on the internet, this MIT white paper by Aubrey Jaffa. And whilst there were several formulas in the paper, it was this dropping paint one, which you can see really small in the top left there and sort of on the right there. And that was the one that we sort of found really interesting and wanted to try and recreate. There was only kind of one catch. Like, I'm awful at maths. I actually only studied maths up to age 16. So when I see a formula like that, my head spins. And I'm sure for some of you guys in the audience, that kind of, seeing a formula like that is pretty trivial. But
shout out to the maths crew.
Yeah. But for me, I'm not that bright. So I decided, to use an LLM to sort of break down the formula into concepts I could understand. And it was about just nearly a year ago we did this project, and it's not something I'd really done before, but I do find myself now just jumping in, and it's not necessarily solving the vex for me or anything like that, but what it is doing is just breaking stuff down into like smaller bite-sized pieces that my brain can handle. And after a short while, I had my Vex figured out and actually a sort of working prototype inside a Houdini. And these were the first tests I made. I was pretty happy considering. I think it was a Saturday. I had my girlfriend nagging at me to head out for the afternoon, and I managed to sort of figure it out in just about an hour or so. And obviously these designs are kind of interesting, but they're not really cover art worthy. So now we're going to look at sort of where we took that build next. So we started with a grid, and I scattered some droplets onto it. And the amount of droplets varies based on a wedge attribute, which we'll see later. We had a bit of position noise on those droplets along X and Z, and we use, again, a wedge switch to alternate between smooth and erratic droplet distribution. We create an ID on the droplets, and we use a solver to create a frame-born attribute. And by subtracting the current frame, we can calculate an age attribute per droplet as well. We enumerate the ID attribute to fix any duplicates. That's for when multiple droplets are falling at once. And we use a wrangle to set some wedged p-scales as well. We blast out each droplet and copy a circle at its position as well, which you can see there. We dive inside another solver, and this is where we're going to run the code you saw previously. And that's essentially just going to push the existing droplets points away from the incoming centroids of the just-born droplets as well. And to fix, you can see some overlapping there, but to fix the overlapping, we just push each droplet back up on Y using its ID as a multiplier. We smooth everything out with a resample, and then we're going to normalize that age attribute between, I think, frame 1 and 125. We're just going to give it a little sort of curve so it creates this fall-off, and that's going to be used later on in Welham. We dive into COPS, really simple setup here, but and all we're doing here is just rasterizing the images down into, so we can apply it to a grid later. There's a little bit of blurring going on the age attribute in that loop there, and that's just to smooth everything out in the Welham sim. The third output there actually gets sent to TOPS as well for exporting higher res 2K textures later on as well. We use the same grid we referenced at the start. We add some normals and some UVs, because you need those usually. And we grab our rasterize age attribute from COPS using an op function, as well as our color attribute as well. And then we're going to dive inside Welham in a second, I think. And our age attribute is basically used as a multiplier on our cloth's rest length there, just to drive the expansion and contraction of the material. Now we're going to dive into our TOPNet, and we're setting a few attributes at the top there. We've got our frame range, our camera, our version number, and some metadata, which later gets baked into the previews we're going to make. You can see the attribute list here. We've got just randomized seed values. We've got some float values, and you can obviously be very specific or really go wild with those values. But I was working to some fairly tight constraints to ensure the sim didn't blow up basically. And now I've sped this up by 4, but is it playing? No. But this is basically all those tasks executing. And first, it's going to cache all those droplets out for us. It's running 16 instances of Houdini in the background there, so it's mega quick. We're going to cache our Welham. Once that's cooked, it'll start rendering out our image sequences that then are going to be turned into those MP4 previews. Should maybe sped it up more. But it is quick. Like the MP4 caching you saw there, it's just, it's like instant. It's pretty cool. And yeah, like I said, finally that 2K image is saved out to disk. And just to prove that all worked, we can head to our file browser and view all the exports. We've got our caches, our MP4 previews, and our animated textures for using rendering. All nice and tidy. And it's the sort, leaving that to run, you can sort of head out for lunch, maybe go and have a pint,
Absolutely.
You come back and the work has kind of been done for you in many ways. So these are some of the play blasts from that build. You can see more clearly here the fabric sort of initially contracting and being released. That's, again, been driven by that age attribute. And just as a reminder, these are obviously just preview textures on here, 512 textures, but the final ones are being exported at 2K for rendering. And what I really like about working this way is by viewing so many iterations of this theme, you can really become very objective about what's working, what doesn't work, and why. And it makes it a lot easier for Clayton and I and the client to have informed decisions about where we go next on a project. And yeah, we ran several of those systems, those wedge iterations, and ended up something a little slower. And this was just an edit of three wedges we selected. And just as a little side note, we were playing around with Comfy UI at the time as well, and we used that to create all the little sort of roughness maps you can see in the displaced areas there. Yeah, so in a short amount of time, we ended up with lots and lots of viable artworks that really could have been used for the campaign, and it really wouldn't have been possible without being able to automate, the simulations, the play blasts, the texture exports, all using TOPS. The timeline for these projects is always incredibly short, so anything you can automate or turn around overnight or while you're not at your computer, basically, is always really helpful. If anyone's interested in having that, grabbing that file, you can, you can grab it here from my G drive.
Remove the paywall.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'll hand over to Clayton.
Give you a sec to scan that. But yeah, you've seen, through some of the projects that Kieran showed you before from a commercial point of view, but also, the same approach here for something that was, more creative, you could say, in some ways, but much more open. It's a great way of working, and we've got a little bit more about that to show you coming up. Perhaps we'll bring that up again at the end. So keeping moving. So we've looked there as at what automation through TOPS can give us by way of a filter, getting down to those decisions that we were talking about there, putting things in front of ourselves internally, but also in front of clients to make decisions fairly rapidly. So we can see it as a filter, but we can also, and with the next project we're going to talk about, see the automation as a means to really expand as well. So sometimes we don't just want to get to one image. We might want to exploit a different type of process and look at creating a huge amount of assets. And that particular project is lovingly known as Vessel. And Vessel was also for London Craft Week. So it's getting a massive shout out here today. But Vessel was we'll talk a little bit about the title of the project in a second. But London Craft Week, as you've just seen, we've worked with for a couple of years now. And this particular year, which was 2024, was their 10-year anniversary. So they were super interested in doing something a little bit different, a little bit special. They didn't want to create one image for the front of their catalogue, for their guide and their campaign. And very early on, working with TM Studio, who the graphic design team that we were collaborating with very closely, they introduced us to this idea of this printing press called the HP Indigo 12,000. And that is a printing press that it's possible to print unique sheets of paper every single sheet. So in a way, looking at all that Kieran's just talked about by way of creating sort of iterations and different images, we could really start to see how that could come together as a process, and how could start to think about how we could exploit what this printer was able to produce. So there was the technical side of it, but also this is Craft Week, right? This is a kind of world of crafting. It's the world of kind of human making. And there's an example there of a piece of work by Edmund de Waal, who some of you may know. I'm a big fan of his work, but what I really love about this particular reference is the process he goes through in order to create these vessels, these cups. And he's trying, on a potter's wheel to create the same item time and time again. But of course, just through human error and human making processes, they all end up slightly different. And I think that's the thing about craft, is that they're, the kind of iterations and the addition, let's say, will always come out with slight imperfections and slight differences from object to object or asset to asset. And yeah, we quite like that. And so all that you've just seen from what Kieran's talked about there from the TOPS wedging process is a little bit like putting things into an oven, putting pots into a kiln as a potter, and not really knowing what you're going to get when you bring them back out. You know roughly what you're going to get, but you're going to get the nice sort of surprises and the little differences that start to get us excited. So it was really about iteration and this idea of an addition. Vessel, as I say, was the title, and that was, you know, not only because we were dealing with things like cups and vases, but because it was a container for this body of people, makers, and that particular moment in time in London. So, yeah, Vessel felt like a great name for this as a kind of container for that festival. And so we thought we better get on and test this out and have a look at, you know, how can we exploit that printing innovation, and how can we create lots of assets. So here's our starting point, a cup which we sort of designed, and you know, the structure that's within that, you can see it was something that we were making the decisions on, the sort of silvery metal. Crucially, the height and the width of that, and you'll see why later on, was something that we had complete control over.
Yeah, and I think, again, just some visual context for what was happening in this first you know, R&D phase. You know, obviously just making the base blueprint file there, and again, simulating that to generate, you know, a load of different varieties of that, and then running simulation on top of that to create the patina details you can see there. And we're essentially, yeah, building that blueprint, but it's really the thresholds on the wedge node and everything that dictates, you know, how much we're going to stray away from that original design, which you can see on the right-hand side there.
And so, very rapidly, because that's what this is really good for, is that we started to see an addition coming out of the kiln, as it were. And here's the iterations that we got on the cup that we originally started with. So this is Houdini's starting to pump these out. And you're seeing that there's, you know, the height's staying the same and the width's staying the same, so all those parameters and thresholds that Kieran set up have kind of kept them, because we could let them go wild, of course, as well, and so we could have all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening here. But we've got variation in structure, we've got variation in the sort of thickest, thinnest, narrowest, and widest points, but on the whole, they're behaving themselves. And I just love how this grew. Very, very quickly, we ended up with what looks like a sort of museum catalogue of pots and cups and wine glasses, and I think the Holy Grail's in there somewhere as well. So another point to make on these is that we're not just getting image results out of the back end of this process. You know, we live in an age of being able to rapidly create images, videos, even now, you know, via AI packages and prompting. What we're getting here is that we're not, by running this process, baking ourselves out of the design process. We're creating models. So these are coming out of the process as something we can then go on and retexture, relight, completely scrap and squash and do, you know, another wedge on top of these if we wanted to. So yeah, we were sort of really sort of proud of that, and but the client didn't really want for their 10th year anniversary a cup. So that's fair enough. So we looked again back at, yeah, what does the festival represent? And these are some of the references again. We're kind of going through and just, you know, making sure we're building some integrity into this. And you can see that there's vases, there are bowls, and, you know, some of them really enviable. I really love that one in the middle. But the further right we go on this very small diagram, the more sort of sculptural and experimental and sort of abstract they get as vessels. And that's something we thought, well, do you know what? Quite like that, and I quite like that maybe our vessel could, could be a little bit more dynamic, or maybe something a little bit more unexpected.
Mm-hmm. So we sort of started with, like Clayton says, more of a traditional vessel, but then we thought, well, if we can sort of start slicing this thing up, we can maybe play with some of the orientations, and that's kind of what we did. So we extracted the cross-section of all these different vessels. We reordered those cross-sections based on the current wedge index, each iteration, reorientated those parts, and then again, depending on you know, their index value, they'd either get you know, left as is, halved, or quartered, which a bit medieval, but it kind of worked quite well. And then the final structure was meshed, and what was cool about this is, you know, the resulting thing looks nothing like where we started, but if you rewound that process, you end up back with a vessel, which we quite liked. It like retained the, you know, the original DNA of that you know, that vase.
It's a vessel.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't argue with that. So we had a form, we were happy, we had a technique, we had a means to make many. then we just got into what we see ourselves doing more often than not, which is applying materials, applying shaders, getting into understanding like how can we actually even more represent the festival that this is for. So here you're seeing some ceramic, which is being lit. Nice to see it big like that. If you can get a photograph of that and send it to us, that'd be great. This is side lit, with the gel lighting as you would expect in a studio. So, and we were getting into all sorts of different materials. So spray painting, resins. You can see some sort of wire work, even enamel going on there as well. So this was much broader exploration than what we're sort of showing you here, but in the interest of time. And then, there was this particular embroidered suede, which I thought was doing something very interesting. Yeah.
I mean, we were again, like I said, we had very tight turnaround on these projects, these studio projects. So we're really conscious about keeping, the Houdini builds simple because we're basically going to be running, hundreds of them through the system. We don't want crashes. We don't want anything to fall over. Not that Houdini ever crashes.
Asterisk. Side note.
So this I'm just going to look at a couple of really simple setups, and this was just using generating auto UV boundaries, blasting that geometry apart, and then kind of stitching it back together and adding some little stitch details in there. Super simple, but like kind of worked quite well and felt very handcrafted.
But it's those hanging threads, isn't it, that you sort of see. Off the edge, and the fact that it's not perfect, I think that's how we know the world, that's how we see the world, and I think that's what can make things feel more beautiful, is that they're just not perfect, right? And they have those imperfections and little mistakes and little threads that hang off. I think that's what really makes these sort of sing off the screen.
Another one was just where we were scattering points on the geometry and calculating the tangent U of those tangent U gradients, and then orientating the stitches away from the center of those points. And again, it just created this really weird hand-woven kind of feeling surface detail, which we quite liked. There's another one. This one was using surface advection to drive displacement. And what's cool about this is we're not just pulling in textures from an external source. These are being calculated each time based on the form, and this one in this case was simulated. So it's actually running along the surface of these individual geometries, which again it just adds to that sense of handcraft that you wouldn't get from pulling in a texture or something like that.
But once again, a reminder, and we were working with the client, and they wanted celebratory imagery, and so embroidered suede wasn't quite cutting it. So we quite sort of quickly, because again, this is a project that was probably less than 2 weeks, all in all, which is pretty mind blowing. Thinking back, but the idea of gold came from them. It was, they are kind of represented quite a lot of luxurious objects, and so it kind of made a lot of sense. And you're sort of seeing here a glimpse of how that started to come to life, and across a set of assets that we then created in various categories, if you like. So there's the ceramics, there's the enameling, there's there's that simulated surface advection version one there, which is a bit more of an enamel, jewelry and wire work, metal work. These are the 5 images that the client signed off, and you'll see that the reason we had those thresholds at the beginning was so that they behaved themselves and sat really nicely within the masthead that TM Studio had designed. So we knew that these were going to work, and the idea was that they sat in that framework and were kind of captured really beautifully in the typography. We didn't want any overlapping, and it worked, and so that was a real result. But as I say, the client signed these 5 off, but we actually created 200 of each of those. So they went from 1 hero image to 1,000 hero images for this particular campaign. And we didn't even venture into allowing them to try and go into a sign-off process on this. It's like we've made 5 if you like them, and we're going to make 995 more in the same vein, and we're just going to have to run with it. Quite different in that respect. And you do sometimes need a brave client to be able to allow you to do these sorts of things. But it seemed that this time all the planets aligned. And then, just a few glimpses for you as to how that then played out. And, the humble guide. We've all got tote bags with guides in today, and, I think that the idea of having one of your own and it being, unique and bespoke was something that really elevated the value of this. And, that was further exploited by way of us being able, it's a dreadful photograph, but it makes a point in that on the back of each of those guides, we were able to kind of put this limited edition number. So the printing press is kind of able to just create a unique object every single time it comes off the press, which is ace. And of course, everybody, I'd love to say that everybody went mad for these guides, so they collected all 1,000, but I'm not sure that that's the case. But it did raise the value of this kind of, but something that they make every year. So yeah, and then of course you see it across town, a bit like the other London Craft Week project, but this time, every time you'd see it, it would have a different form on it, as and when Transport for London and those that kind of allow you to put advertising in the city would allow. But yeah, it was nice to sort of see it in and around town and to get surprised in a way by way of what image was going to turn up.
And yeah, we spent sort of 2 weeks on the project, and really from initial R&D to final print, we just had such a large quantity of assets and R&D that we actually decided to document the process ourselves as well by, you can hold it up.
Yeah, shall I hold it up?
By creating a book as well, which again made use of this amazing printing process that Clayton mentioned earlier. So, here the type on these books, the type is unique on every single one of these books. The imagery is different throughout the books as well. So no two books are the same. If you turn to the centerfold, they've all got a different image in them, which is just really cool. And yeah, we ended up, I think we made 250, and yeah, all had one-of-a-kind layouts. Obviously, the type stayed consistent, but not the larger type. The larger type would shift around this grid system.
It makes it really difficult, though, when you want to get a copy of it. You're just like, what form am I going to get? And then I don't really want that one. I want another one. So you create a bit of a rod for your own back. But yeah, this is also...
And the posters took that, again, one step further, and it would actually randomly crop and rotate the images too, which, again, just added to that sense of uniqueness, which was really cool.
And seeing us in the world of print, like this, we've got, a number of us graphic design backgrounds, and it's a real pleasure to sort of even smell the ink on the page of these sorts of things. But to see, something that we generally associate with screen-based animation and image making with Houdini, to see that, collaborate in a way with an innovation within print, felt quite exciting and very different. And so we were, fairly receiving these and holding a bit of our work rather than pressing play on a bit of our work, I think was something that felt really, really quite rewarding. Yeah. You can have a look at this after as well. It'll be down on the bottom of the stage if you want to.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think I just love this idea that we took a load of wedges and then we wedged the wedges with a printer. I think that was like really, really cool. And it was also nice that how a few, small Houdini builds that we'd made really were transformed into large bodies of works. And of course, TOPS played a huge, huge part in that. There was no way I was going to sit there and run all these things 1,000 times. And, like I said, we like to go for a beer at lunch. So yeah, we're on slide 98 of 99, so we're going to wrap things up with a little edit of some Houdini R&D that myself and the rest of the team at Found have been up to recently. Thanks again for listening, and thanks again to Side Effects for having us. Can we make sure the volume's up? Thanks.
Please. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Before we jump into the questions, I just want to say a big thanks to you guys for sharing the file. and hopefully you got a screenshot of that. The Houdini community is known for being so generous and collaborative and sharing, and this is it in action. You can take that and then take that to a new place. Use that as a starting point for future development and learning. So very cool to have shared that. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
This is the scary bit.
Yeah, no, any easy questions? We'll take some easy questions. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It's really amazing. I have a very, very simple question about when you finally prepare your system and you run all these variations and you generate like thousands of images, at some point the client decides for one. Mm-hmm. So my question is how you get back all these parameters you generate, okay. So you have some kind of file to...
when you're wedging, right, there's, like I said about that metadata, probably should have talked about that more, but that gets baked in to those preview files that you have.
Like a CSV file or something like this?
You can watermark those files. You can also, if you like a particular wedge, say it's 100, you can then click on that wedge in TOPS, and it will just bring up all those parameters. So, yeah, it's super easy. Yeah. Test the hip. Yeah.
Other questions?
No.
Looking around. Don't be shy. Ask questions. It's interesting when the procedural dependency graph is another word for TOPS, task operators. And when that first launched a few years ago, it was very technical and weird and abstract, and no one knew how to use it. And so it didn't really take off at first. And they also improved the user experience over time. I think it's one of the most interesting and powerful uses or workflows within Houdini because it allows you to automate things and do these things at scale and do wedging and all kinds of interesting things. So super interesting to see it in use, in production, in such cool, creative ways, especially when you take it into physical and make a book from it. It's super cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, the part where you used the formula and then you kind of just rendered, you said about 200 or something from these droplets. Did you change like the formula within like the expressions and everything every time, or what did you do?
You mean the Jaffa code? Yeah. No, that's like a constant. It's really the noises that are changing. I think I wedged like the Welham sim as well. There's like the constraints changed each time, the amount of droplets, things like that. Yeah, that was it. No, the code remains consistent throughout.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
No worries.
Yeah.
Getting your exercise, Chris.
Getting my steps in today.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you. Fantastic work. I have a question about the infrastructure that you have for running the variations of your everything that you showed. If you have something similar to a render farm, does it need to be outside? Do you have an external service or?
No. This all runs just on like I can run this on my machine in sort of 15 minutes, and it will give me 30 wedges and about 300 frames, and that that's including all the texture exports and everything like that. But with TOPS, you can send stuff to a render farm, so to like Deadline, which we've also done in the past. That's how Vessel was actually done. That was just all those 1,000 frames were just sent to render at 4K. Once it cached everything, it cached most of the stuff locally, and then just rendered on the farm.
Thanks.
No worries.
Just while I'm here, this is the Barcelona Supercomputer Group team.
Oh.
So if you want to learn about supercomputers in Barcelona, talk to these folks.
Nice.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Oh, time for a beer.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Have you found a good way to figure out how many instances you can run in parallel without running out of RAM?
Oh, that's kind of, to be honest, I rebuilt this hip so I could share it, and I actually tweaked a few of the things. So that droplet cache solve runs really, really quickly. So I think my computer has 64 cores. I just leave that at like the default of 16. But for Vellum and stuff, I usually drop it down to 4 because it takes so long sometimes to open up like 16 background instances and then cook them all in the, at once in parallel. So it's much, I find like if you know it's going to be a heavier sim, I tend just to drop it down, or does that kind of make sense?
So you're just using different schedulers for...
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great presentation, guys. Thanks so much.